Oh, hi, hi. I didn't see you there, but it's because we're on the internet. My name is Rashid Anwar Zakat. I'm a filmmaker, artist, and half lifelong Philadelphian. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our program, which is a part of Philly Cam's People Power Media Festival, an annual month-long celebration of community media and our membership. This year, we're focused on sharing ways that our media can be a form of community care. Be sure to catch conversations, workshops, and special programming focused on ways storytelling cultivates care. Tune in to be a part of the fest on cable, radio, and online. For more information, you can visit ppmfest.org. One more time, that is ppmfest.org. Philadelphia Stories was a program that chronicled our city's rich cultural fabric and imagined futures through the eyes of independent filmmakers and community storytellers. I was one of them. It was cool. It introduced all genres of filmmaking and gave many filmmakers their first broadcast premiere. Now, 20 years later, PhillyCam, with generous support from the Independence Public Media Foundation, is providing Philadelphians the opportunity to revisit these memorable independent films. This panel is part of that exploration. How do we tell Philly stories? Our panelists are Shameka Sawyer, who is an award-winning Black film and media producer. She's the founder and creative director of the Five Shorts Projects, one of the few film production companies in Philadelphia, PA, owned and operated by an African-American woman. Five Shorts Project, the project's main goal is to make filmmaking accessible for marginalized communities. The project has produced over 30 short films created by first-time filmmakers. Women of color created 70% of the films. That's amazing. Our next panelist is Michelle Angela Ortiz. Michelle Angela Ortiz is a visual artist, skilled muralist, community arts educator, and filmmaker who uses her art as a vehicle to represent people and communities whose histories are often lost or co-opted. Her work tells stories richly, bleh, sorry, read that one more time. Her work tells stories using richly crafted and emotive imagery to claim and transform spaces into a visual affirmation that reveals the strength and spirit of the community. That is an incredible bio. Our last panelist is Ted Passon. Ted is an award-winning director, writer, producer, and video artist. He created and directed the critically acclaimed docuseries Philly DA. I'm sure all of y'all have seen it, along with director Yoni Brook and producer Nicole Salazar. How's everybody doing? How y'all doing?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here in such great company.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for getting us together, Rashid.
Well, we can dive right into it. My first question is for everybody. What does community care look like to you?
Community care is a way to connect with individuals that you share space with and to be supportive, to listen to their stories or complaints or, I don't know, successes and sharing those experiences and working together just to make sure your community is heard and looked after.
That's beautiful. That's really
Yeah, I
beautiful.
would I would say it also makes me think of. I mean, there's like the wider Philadelphia community, but it also makes me think of the creative or artistic community in Philadelphia.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot of places where when I think of places like New York or LA, and the vibe there is very competitive and people kind of pushing each other out of the way to kind of get to things. And I think in Philly is something I've always appreciated about it and loved about it is, there's not a lot of money to fight over here. So there's much more of an attitude of we're all in it together and we're going to
Mm.
help each other out. And, I think fostering this mindset of, what's good for anybody is good for everybody, and thinking about like making work and making community that is thinking about lifting everybody up and bringing everybody up together, because we're all in it together as artists here in Philadelphia. And then thinking about like, how like the industry and how even the art practice like kind of preys upon people through like maybe the capitalist pressures and other things that are on
Mm.
there. And there's a lot of traps that we all fall into. And how can we as a community think about looking out for each other there, and creating a space where like healing is possible, where being a human is possible, where thinking beyond the demands of like maybe more capitalist industry system wants from us is possible. And I think sometimes it can be easier to take care of others than it is to take care of yourself. And So, it's just an important, mindset for maybe us all to think about for each other.
Ditto with what Ted and Shameka are mentioning and have shared. I also feel like one thing that I really appreciate from Philly and being a Philadelphian is how direct and honest communities are. And sometimes it's like, even in the way that stories are told, how they want their stories told, opening spaces for them to say, this is how we want to be represented. This is what's really important to share. This is the truth that we want to share, right? I think that that's one thing that I really appreciate about our city, especially when I'm traveling and there's a lot of the passive aggressiveness or, yeah, we'll do this. And then, or I love it and they really hate it. I mean, Philly is like very direct. And so I think that that's the other thing that I feel like once we're, once I'm building with community, right? There's learning on both sides, and a perspective on a particular story can evolve, and there's room and space for that because of that kind of directness that is needed, right? And then that then adds to the authenticity of the story. So I just wanted to add that, building on what everyone else has said, which I totally agree with as well.
That's dope. That's dope. And I kind of want to build on that thought a little bit of like Philadelphia doesn't get a sort of credit in this like media landscape for its texture and the experience that happened here. Like something you said, Michelle, about the honesty that people have. Like I've been yelled at on SEPTA multiple times. Um, and I think about all of y'all as storytellers making work in Philadelphia, and I'm really curious to what makes a Philadelphia story. Like what makes something either the aesthetic of it or the subject matter or even the process of it being made. Like what makes a Philly story?
I can say that wow, it's the style. The and I also heard that we have an accent. So the accent, right? All of our slang terms like John, can't leave that out. Um I think with Philly and us as storytellers, we have this way of being just raw and honest. You know, um, we don't like to sugarcoat too much, and that's from everything from visual art all the way down to like hip hop music. Our music, our vibe is just real. Down to the fans, as everyone knows. Like we're just real. We speak from the heart. We love hard, and I think it just really shows through in the content that we create.
Yeah, I think that rawness and that directness that everyone's talking about, that's just like kind of sewed into like Philly culture. In some ways, like really makes for rich storytelling because it's very clear what everybody's thinking, what everybody's feeling. The conflicts are right in your face. From a narrative standpoint, like in making Philly DA, for instance, like it's it was very much a portrait of the city, and I think a lot of people watching it were like, oh my God, I can't believe you got so and so to say that, or so and so was willing to like put that forward, and so is doing that. And it's like, yeah, because people in Philly, we just don't hold back. And that's great because it's, creates like this more honest portrait of where we're at right now, for better or worse. And I think it's important. I think one thing it's made me appreciate, especially just being steeped in that project, was like, it's great that we do it, and we shouldn't judge it too much, because in some ways it's like, even if you like completely don't agree with what somebody's saying, you think they're putting out something terrible, it's actually great that they're willing to just put it out and be honest about it, so you can talk about it, so you can get it out there. And so I think if we like maybe judge people or shame people, that would be, I don't think we want to push back on that part of Philly culture. I think it's actually very useful for talking honestly about where we are and looking about where we have to go. So I think it's actually a great gift to storytelling in the national landscape that we have this culture that prioritizes that.
And I also want to add that I think that, Philly is like so incredibly layered, right? So like when you were talking about Shameka, like John, like I always tell people I'm a child of immigrants, but grew up South Philly, right by the 9th Street Market. I would say things like railing, or, you know, like the way that the cadence of even speaking and the rhythm that I speak English is also very different than how I speak Spanish, right? And so I think that that's really interesting too, in terms of just, you know, you can be in one part in South Philly interviewing someone and then go somewhere else in West Philly, and it's a totally different way of speaking and rhythm, and how, you know, the points that they're accentuating, right? But I think that that's the rawness is always still there, you know. So I think that that's another thing that I really love about Philly, where, like, you know, you can be at an open outdoor market, and then you could go to another community where folks are riding horses, right? It's like there's just such a great just spectrum of just stories. And I also want to add, is included in that kind of, again, diversity, if we were to say that, or multiple layers, it's represented in the environment, right? So like how the houses are, how they've decorated, how the light hits a certain street or block, like all of those things are really visually, for me, interesting. So, you know, I think of city, the Philadelphia is a big city, but in Spanish I call it like little pueblos, like these little like worlds or towns that, you know, have their own rhythm and their own culture, and what's acceptable, what's not, and just a super deep history too, that continues to either repeat itself or transform or evolve into something different. So,
You know, each one of all of your work, I think, could be considered a type of advocacy. I think both in process and in product. And I'm a bit curious to how, you know, before we sort of start to see the work, how do you balance advocacy with artistic merit? You know, like there is a message that you're trying to do. There's some politics behind the purpose of making the work, the purpose of who needs to see the work, the purpose who's included in the work. But things still need to look good. You know, things still need to be interesting or entertaining. Things still need to fit within a story structure in a way. And I'm just curious to what concessions you make or not, or how do y'all balance those things?
There's not much of a balance. I kind of just go with what I feel. Especially with the piece that you guys will see, it's very personal to me. And to be honest, I was a little bit adamant about even putting it out there because of how personal it is, and how it doesn't stick to the traditional structure of a documentary. And I just told myself, like, listen, this is art. This is what you feel. And 9 times out of 10, there is someone else who feels the same way and may have a similar story, who's a little bit adamant about sharing their story. So for me to put my story out there, it's like opening up doors and opportunities for others to speak out and share their stories as well. So yeah, I would say for me, it's not the right answer, but I really, really, really go with my gut and what I feel.
For me, this is something I think about all the time. I'm a strong believer in the idea that, like, no one is going to, if there is a message or if there is something you're trying to convey, that nobody's going to connect to it if they don't care, if they're not invested in the project first. Because there's no point in just, I think, in just giving a message to someone who already knows it. And so if you're trying to bring people in, and you're trying to, like, you know, push ideas into places where maybe they weren't before, I really think that, like, you know, the audience, whoever is viewing it, needs to connect with, you know, people. They need to connect with place, or they need to connect with something human in there that is going to make them care, before they're going to take whatever the message is or whatever the stats are that do this. And if the stats and the message and everything else aren't in service of a story or something that feels really cohesive, then I think they're just not going to get it. You know, like, I used to really worry that, like, oh, if we don't, like, tell them this fact or tell them this thing, like, you know, they're going to be lost, or they're not going to, like, be outraged, or they're not going to, like, care. And if it's I really feel like I've come to learn that, like, if it's not really of a piece, and it's not all in service of the artistic vision of the narrative, or like what the rules of the piece are, then no one's going to get it anyway. So it doesn't matter that you put it in there if it's not embedded in a way that feels cohesive. And I do feel like there's been a movement more recently where I feel like aesthetics are almost like coming back to more like socially conscious work or political work. It used to drive me crazy where it would feel like, oh, if I'm gonna like tell you something important in the film, then like the aesthetics don't matter. It doesn't matter if it's pretty. It doesn't matter if it's good, you know, like, or like technically sound, because the message is so urgent. And that used to just make me crazy, because at the end of the day, like, this is art and you want it to be beautiful. You want people to connect to it. And like someone's, you know, like, why not just make a lecture then, you know, rather than like a visual piece that's supposed to be visual and evoke something visually. And so I've been happy to see that it feels like just overall more and more people are coming back to like really like thinking a lot more about like the visual artistry of the piece, because I really think that at the end of the day, that's how people are gonna connect.
For me, because I've really focused the majority of my artistic career in doing public artworks, and working directly with the community, I have bear witness to these beautiful, moving stories, these moments of just revelations, these moments of connection, these moments of change, right, that lead into bigger ways of change. And I feel that when I look at film or see my camera, it's really another tool, right? Just like it's a brush, or just like it's a conversation. And so I'm always shy in saying filmmaker, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I still have so much to learn. But I just feel that the moving image is another way of extending and presenting these stories more in depth than I'm able to convey, let's say through a mural, or let's say through an exhibition, right? And so I think that's one key thing that I would just say in terms of presenting the story. And what I would also add is, because I'm always thinking like stories, I consider myself a visual storyteller, and that is the connection through all of the mediums that I do. But the image is so extremely important, as Ted was saying, along with what is the story being told. And so in the case of Las Madres de Burks, which is my short film that represents the stories of 4 mothers that were detained at a family prison here in Pennsylvania for 2 years. The mothers were just so involved in writing campaign letters, or creating stories of how they've been victimized by the system for the courts, right? So that they are able to be released. And there was really no space for like love and tenderness, and even they speaking about light and strength in a way that they remember, or how they've learned from their lives even before setting foot at the border, right? And so there's a scene that we won't play today, but there's a scene where one of the mothers is singing a song to her son as she's wearing her probation bracelet. And that's a song that she would sing to him to calm him down when they were at the prison. And so I think that those moments are so incredibly important to connect, as, when we're dealing with a system that is dehumanizing these women and families that have their legal right of seeking asylum. It's so important to show those moments of, excuse me, it's so important to show those moments of connection as a mother, as a child, as someone who knows what it is to feel loved and feel secure in the midst of a system that wants to label you as a criminal. And so that was my way of presenting the situation, but in a very tender, beautiful moment between a mother and a child. And so I just love when I'm watching films, and with other folks' films, is just seeing those visuals that express so much more than those statistics and the action that needs to take. Because if I see this person as myself, as a human being, as a mother, I'm going to be moved to take more of an action versus someone reading facts to me.
I mean, we've seen in our lifetime, I think about Black Lives Matter and how that wouldn't be possible as widespread of a movement. And we're seeing how much Black thought gets proliferated through sort of that as a channel largely because of the moving image. And, I think that just feels incredibly important for the world that we're moving into. And to talk about moving images, I would love to move into talking about some of the pieces that y'all came to share with us today. Ted, can you tell us a little bit about the clip that you came with?
Sure. So I'm showing a clip from our series Philly DA. That's an 8-part documentary series. And we shot this over about 4 years. And, we looked recently and we realized that we had over 500 production days on this series. So we spent a lot of time shooting. We were following District Attorney Larry Krasner and his team inside the District Attorney's office, and following a whole cast of characters outside around the city at different institutions. But part of our process is that we would go shoot almost every single day. And, we had things that we knew we were going to be looking out for. We had like different things that we knew they were going to be working on that we thought would be storylines that we were trying to make sure that we were around for. But there were other things that happened that we just could never have predicted. And the clip you're about to see now is one of those moments.
Supposed to be somewhere at 5:15.
So we're done?
But we can revisit that some more. Thank you.
Should we make it
Larry, some F drives were wiped
Really?
white
recovered.
or
And do we know when they were wiped?
after October 2017.
That's interesting.
It was former employees.
Rather peculiar thing. Destroy all your work product. Anybody who's dealt with this office knows that there are secrets. We need to find out where the secrets are.
How long do it take you to look for sensitive files, floor by floor, drawer by drawer?
All right, this is all personnel files, so don't need to worry about that. This one's not personnel files. Oh.
What is it?
Files about police officers.
This guy, this guy.
Yeah, I remember that. And this one's just labeled damaged goods. You gotta be kidding me. And it's literally just do not call memos for officers. I don't know what to do with this. Oh.
Yeah. See that one?
Yeah, I don't know.
I do. Testifies all the time. Now a detective.
A list of officers so troubled, prosecutors will not call them to testify about their cases. Corruption, child sex abuse, drunk driving, assault, and that's just a partial list of what they've been accused of.
You want to hang out for a minute? Enjoy the cast that is about to erupt. Oh my goodness.
Man, I feel like all of the comparisons that Philly DA has been getting to The Wire are so apt, both in sort of what it shows you in the city, but also the tension. You said you had 500 shooting days, and I'm just thinking about all of the pieces that the series hits. Like, how did you decide on what to leave in, what to take out, and just how to weave things together?
Yeah, the weaving was a really hard part. That was probably the hardest. So I'll say that the way we started is that, we came in not really knowing what the story was, other than that this guy who nobody ever expected was going to be district attorney suddenly became the district attorney. And is he good? He's talking a big game about everything he wants to do. And is he going to be able to do any of these things? If so, or if not, why? And but the campaign gave us a kind of a clue as to what we should be looking out for, because in the campaign, we could already tell what were kind of like the controversial issues that everybody was animated about, everybody was hoping would happen or hoping would not happen, depending on, what your viewpoint was. And so we kind of had a sense of like, okay, we know that there's going to be challenges around these certain issues. So let's try to be around when they're talking about these key things as best as we can. And we kind of assumed that like, okay, we're going to go after maybe, what we thought was going to be maybe like 6 different stories that then turned into maybe like 12 different stories, with the assumption that like, okay, we're probably going to whittle this down into probably 2 stories, and it's going to be a feature, and there's going to be maybe like some sort of A story about his journey from, outsider to insider, and then some sort of B story about, something that's really a really hard challenge that they're trying to do. And we just could not crack it. We just couldn't figure out like what were the two storylines that really represented this well, that really summed up the issues well, that really like let you understand the power and the scope of what this office means in communities and in the criminal justice system. And then the other thing that happened was that our stories kept going, and we were able to shoot endings to them, that was the other thing, is we just kind of assumed, okay, we're going to miss endings to these, so that'll make some decisions for us, but we kept kind of getting them. And so when we started putting it together, we were just like, the most creatively satisfying version of this is a series. But then that's a lot harder, because if a network doesn't want to make it, it's almost next to impossible to make a series. So we were just like hoping that somebody wanted to make it. Thankfully, eventually PBS did. And then we even had a thing with them where we're like, we think it's 6 episodes, and they're like, can you do 5? And we're like, yeah, sure. And then we started cutting it together, and we're like, oh no, we're way off. We're like, here's 2 episodes that are like 2 hours each. Like, what would you cut? We realized it's probably actually more like 8 episodes, unless we lose the story. What do you guys want to lose? And thankfully, in their infinite wisdom, they were like, well, actually, we don't want to lose any of this stuff, so let's try to figure out 8. And we're like, thank you. We were hoping that was the answer. And so we realized that like our series arc was a much more simple and almost like subtle story of just almost really just more so about Larry and his journey with like how the city is viewing what he's doing, and just overall like how are people accepting what he's trying to do or not, and just kind of like this larger mission of almost like storytelling, which we kind of realized was a part of his job that never went away. And it was interesting to see it. Sometimes, they were telling the story really well and people were behind him, and other times the story wasn't being told as well, or whatever, or the opposition was just winning. And so that ended up being this more kind of like subtle, like arc over the series. And we realized that it was enough. It didn't really need to be deeper than that. And that each episode would have its own self-contained kind of B story that would start and end within that episode. And we realized it was just way more, easy to follow, but it was a long, arduous process of figuring out that interweaving. And we were changing stuff up until the 0 hour, like the last episode was not what we thought it was going to be. And we kept trying to make the other version work, and it just didn't work. And then in the last month, we just basically redid the whole thing and pulled out a story that we thought was never going to work, and realized it was the one that was going to work if we could just figure it out. But it was almost didn't make it, but we did.
Looks like we made it.
Yeah.
I'm a little curious. I know we're supposed to talk about media, but I'm really curious to what you learned about Philadelphia politics in this process. And I'm sure there are things that they're probably a little off kilter to share, but even for your own sort of political education, just of how things work or how people interact, I'm curious.
There was a really stupid thing I learned in a way that I feel like in retrospect should not have surprised me at all, just being from Philly. And Philly is like, I think if you live here, it's kind of like a small town masquerading as a big city. It's like everyone knows everybody. Everyone's like 2 degrees from everybody else. And I don't know why it never occurred to me that like politics and government and the criminal justice system were all the exact same way. All of these people know each other. They came up together. Everybody knows everybody's dirty laundry, who slept with who did this, who did that, and it's a lot more like high school than I assumed. And it's a lot more about like these little personal conflicts and personal histories that are underneath everything that in some ways make so many of the decisions that govern our city. Is that, because so-and-so doesn't like so-and-so because of something that happened 20 years ago, this initiative is not going to pass, or like someone's going to have to make some concession that their constituents aren't going to like, but so-and-so needs that to happen. And it's just, things are kind of complicated as it is, but another big factor is people just don't want to be responsible for something going wrong. And so they'd rather just not do anything than do something new, because they're afraid they're going to get called out if it goes wrong. And so I think so much of reform and so much change simply doesn't happen because someone's afraid of a news article being written that says it was all their fault, when maybe like a 5% thing went wrong when 95% of it went right, but the news story is about the 5% thing. And now suddenly that person's everybody doesn't like them because of what the one little thing that went wrong. And so much is also just about like the narrative and how the media and how even just we as a population, how we tell the story of what's happening, realizing how much work we need to do to kind of like give courage to elected officials to do it, to do these things. And like, it's a tricky proposition, but I do think storytelling has a big role in that, and that's something we as media makers can, play a role in.
Something you just said reminded me of, I want to say it was like the Obama memoirs, where he was talking about, the same politics and the same sort of infighting that you find at a community meeting, you find at a city council meeting, you find at a senator meeting, you find at a NATO summit. You sort of find these levels of dysfunction, these sort of things of dysfunction on sort of every level. To cue up the next thing, Shameka, can you tell us a little bit about the clip we're about to see?
Sure. So I created what is like a short doc / homage to my younger brother, who was murdered last year during the pandemic in Philadelphia. As we all know, Philly has a huge gun violence problem. And unfortunately, I experienced that firsthand. The clip you're going to see is one of the brighter moments in my time with my brother when I held my first red carpet premiere for 5 shorts for all the filmmakers who made films. And he was able to attend, and he was so excited. I gave him a sponsor title, and he was able to like sell his t-shirts. He had a t-shirt line, and I put him in the program booklet, and he was just talking about how proud he was of me and that whole experience.
First open it up, let's see. When you first open it up, that'd be my big sis right there. You know what I'm saying? Shameka Sawyer, you know what I mean? She from Southside like me, original. You know what I'm saying? About mine, hustle harder. You already know this family. Philly Cam. About mine. You think me, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
This is tough because I lost my 2 best friends. I lost my 2 people in the world that I knew loved me no matter what. And I loved them no matter what, right? On the moments leading up to your murder, I just remember trying to talk to you because I saw how much weight you were losing. And it seemed like you were in this space where I really couldn't reach you. Actually, no one could. And I really didn't know what was going on in your life. And you stopped posting on Instagram. Like anyone who knows you know that you would post forever. Like every day, every other day. Multiple times a day. And I just noticed that you wasn't posting anymore. Actually, your last post on Instagram was May 19th, and I was paying attention to what you posted. You had a picture of yourself from a side angle looking ahead, and you said, I listen more than I talk. Now I'm like, wow, it must have been a message in that, and I totally blew that.
Shameka, first of all, all of the love in the world, and thank you for sharing such what feels like such a deep part of yourself with us. With us in this panel, but also with the world. And I want to talk a bit about, how did you get to even allow yourself to be that vulnerable on camera for?
Yeah, so it was hard watching it, actually. I don't watch it because it's just difficult. But making this was a part of, I guess, like therapy for me. I wanted to be close to my brother at the time when I made it. And prior to what happened to him, we were actually working on a short documentary about him and his life and his music and things like that. So I just decided to feel closer to him that I would do this short documentary. Another reason why I did this is because majority of the time you hear from like the parents, the mom, the father, and you don't really get a chance to understand how this affects siblings. And like I mentioned in that piece, I lost both of my brothers. So my oldest brother, I lost to cancer in 2011. This is why I don't, this is why I usually don't share it, because I get so emotional. And then my younger brother last year, and this is the part that the communities don't get a chance to see. They don't see that this is a lasting effect, that gun violence has a lasting effect on those who are impacted by it. It's something that you never get over. It's hard. Like, we grew up in Philadelphia all our lives, and everywhere I go in Philly, I have a memory with both of my brothers. So it's hard. It's very difficult just to watch other people go through this. And I think part of doing this is because I wanted to show, number one, that my brother will not just be a number. You know, he will not just be remembered as a statistic. I wanted people to get a chance to understand who he was as a person, and that he mattered, his life mattered, and he is loved. You know, he was a father, a brother, a son, an uncle, and all those parts of him, the people who are connected to those parts are impacted heavily every day, you know, just trying to live through losing him the way that we did. You know, my oldest brother, he had cancer. So I'm not saying the pain was any different, but you know, you figure it's an illness. You know, eventually we knew that he wasn't going to be with us. But my younger brother, I was just with him the day before. And to get the phone call that I got, and this is crazy because you still hold on to hope. Like, I know someone just said that my brother was shot in the head. I don't know. I guess you just hold on to any glimmer of hope you can until you hear from, you know, the doctors and the police officers that he didn't make it. And I know that me sharing the story was hard. It's hard now to even talk about it. But I also know that there are other people who feel exactly the way that I feel, who unfortunately we share the same pain of this experience. And I don't want them to feel like they're alone, because they're not. You know, it's sad that, you know, we have to connect through something like this. But I just wanted others to know that they're not alone. And sometimes that's all a person needs to know, is that what they're feeling is valid. That anger they feel is valid. Like, the person who did this to my brother still has not been caught. So that feeling of no justice is valid, and that they're not alone in this whole process. So that was the premise of making it.
Thank you for sharing. Do you need to take a moment before we keep going?
Oh, we can keep going. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, of course. Shameka, I mean, the project and the work you're doing is so important. I think about how many folks in Philly, how many folks back home for me lose their lives to gun violence, and all of the families that are left behind, and how many of them really don't have the opportunity to tell their story or to connect with folks in a way that allows you to grieve in a way, or allows you a particular sort of solace. And that sort of connection or community building also feels like it carries over into Five Shorts projects. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about what that is, and just some of the work you're doing with that.
Sure. So the Five Shorts Project, what I do is I help individuals who have an idea turn that idea into a short film. And I've been doing this since 2014. Each year it's gotten bigger. So I started off with actually 4 filmmakers and myself. And now this past season that I just finished, we had 10 filmmakers be a part of it. And for many of them, for some of them, it's just they just love the storytelling aspect, and that they get to create and write stories told from their point of view without having someone else speak for them or tell their stories. And the majority of participants are, BIPOC, and actually women, African American women. And for some of them, though, this is again like a healing process, like it is for me, where you are not talking to the therapist. It's like the camera is the therapist, and you get to share experiences that you probably normally wouldn't talk about in a general setting, but you feel more freedom to show those experiences via film. So for some filmmakers, this is their way of healing and of connecting with others who may too have experienced some of the experiences that they have. But I can honestly say, like, we've been doing so well on the film festival circuit. We've won a couple of awards. I even won a Cameo Award for collaboration. Ooh, Philly Cam. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the project was needed because there are people who have these amazing stories, who are very talented, but they don't necessarily want to go through going to college to get a degree, or a bachelor's in fine arts or a master's in fine arts. And because I went to college, I studied filmmaking and cinematography. I decided to share what I learned with my community to make it more accessible for them, more affordable for them, so they don't feel like they have to go into debt in order to take on filmmaking. No, it's not a Hollywood production that we do, but what comes from that is people realize that all they needed was themselves the whole time. Like everything else is there. You can get it. You can reach out. You can ask to borrow equipment. You can rent equipment, all that stuff. But what's missing is the feeling of this being attainable, that you can do this without having to have $1 million budget. And so by providing this avenue for, individuals who were like myself, it really proved that the stories that we have are important, and that age is just a number, because majority of the filmmakers are over 25. So age is just a number, and that you really shouldn't give up on your goals you feel like it's past your time. Go for it. And that's what this project is all about. Just go for it. Go for what you want to do with filmmaking. And to be honest, once they see themselves on the big screen, or see their films on the big screen, they realize that all along I had it in me.
Yeah. That's amazing. That reminds me of this video essay I saw a while ago, that someone said that there are no filmmaking prodigies, that, we have this myth of this sort of like young white kid that, slides into Hollywood when they're 22 and makes a Marvel movie or something like that. But because filmmaking is it takes so many different opposing skill sets. You have to have the ability to talk to folks, to interview them, but then the patience to sit in a room and edit. And, thinking about how intimidating that can be versus the reality of it, that you can do it, you just got to do it. That just sounds like what you're offering folks is so beautiful. And just it sounds like there are some really amazing stories that are being told and that are really going to come out of that. And that leads me to Michelle. Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about the clip that you brought?
Sure. The clip is part of my 30-minute documentary called Las Madres de Berks. It represents the stories of 4 out of 14 mothers that were detained at the Berks County Residential Center, which is the first of 3 family prisons that have incarcerated children as young as 9 weeks old, and parents that have entered into the United States seeking their legal right for asylum. These mothers that are highlighted in the film, some of them are in the United States, and one in particular, Karen, was deported after being detained for 2 years with her 6-year-old son. During the time that her child was in this prison, he had 2 suicidal attempts. And so Shameka's sharing the story of just, I think, the trauma, right? I think that's the other huge part of filmmaking being a tool to share these stories that are also very painful, and not putting the mothers in a position to have to retell their stories over and over again, but that the film itself is a way to share their perspectives. So the clip that you're about to see, the very first image is the 88-foot long installation. There were 8 public art installations that were made. So this is the scene that we're about to see.
Set of eyes, we really took a look at the moms, as families, as a mom, not as somebody who's here unlawfully or who entered unlawfully, but as asylum seekers. And we tend to forget that they are fleeing a lot of things, but yet they're asylum seekers. And having the detention center being so close by, about 40-minute drive from Harrisburg, and then a 50-minute walk from Allison Hill to the Capitol steps, I think it's a good connecting piece, connecting pathway, that being so close to the Capitol is so far away from us.
Y al gobernador, pues lo que le dije una vez al oficial de inmigración: póngase en mis zapatos y dígame, ¿qué le contestaría a su hijo si su hijo le dice: mamá, ¿por qué no podemos ir por un helado? Mamá, ¿por qué no podemos ir por ropa? Mamá, ¿por qué no puedo salir? Mamá, ¿por qué no puedo ir a un parque? Mamá, ¿por qué no puedo ser libre? Quisiera que él se pusiera en los zapatos de nosotros y que tomara 2 minutos de su tiempo y que tratara de analizar el daño y el trauma que les está haciendo a los niños. Eso.
Pues el mensaje que yo les mando pues a los padres, tanto como a algunas madres que siguen detenidas, pues como yo lo hacía todos los días, de orarle a Dios. Nosotros declaramos victoria, declaramos libertad y que cantábamos que íbamos a ser libres, y así fue como Dios nos pudo sacar. Siempre nosotros decíamos que vamos a ser libres, vamos a salir de aquí, vamos a salir en victoria, y así fue como nosotros salimos.
Una nube nada más, voy con... It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I remember when I screened at Black Star, whoop-de-whoop.
Oh, yes.
A while back. Michelle, I think about you, you work in so many different mediums and modalities, and it feels like film is just like another one that you're adding in there. But even with this piece, in addition to telling the story, in addition to the advocacy work there, it's also... there's so much artwork that's also in the piece. There's so many just like beautiful pieces that you get to see that are part of this. And I'm curious to how, you're thinking about holding, this really heavy subject matter, but with these really kind of, with this intentional beauty in there. And I'm curious, is that something that you're thinking about? Is that something that you are, or is that something that's come about, or what's that relationship like?
Yeah, I think for me, beauty is always still a tool, right? I think it's a way to capture somebody's attention, and then you can kind of dive in deeper. And so I think that was one thing about, I always talk about the film, like you see the public artworks, the main character, the main story are the mothers, and the mothers sharing their story for the very first time in the way that they want to, not through the lens of a lawyer, not through the lens of a campaign, but how they want to tell their story. And so the organizing efforts in the public artwork really come secondary, right? They're like kind of the branches from that main story. And that's how I think about how the public artwork and even the information that's given, right, in terms of the factual information, and with the backdrop of Karen, who you saw, that was shot and filmed in El Salvador. Originally, we were supposed to have two mothers, and one of the mothers had a mental breakdown when she was deported back, and thought that she could be in the film, and she said, I can't do it. Just it's one of those things like, okay, when we talk about ethics and responsibility, and I had said to her, just take care of yourself, right? This is fine. And the public artwork is in terms of this particular film, it's a branch from the main story, which are the women, right, who are not victims, but incredible, powerful warriors that have fought. They fought when they were inside of the prison, and they continue to push and forward. And they also are an inspiration to so many other individuals that have gone through that experience.
You talked a little bit, though, about sort of, one of the mothers not being able to participate. And I'm a bit curious to how you were able to hold space for them telling their stories. Was there sort of a partnership in what they got to, what was edited in or what was taken out, or what they got to sort of see, or what their participation was rather throughout the process?
So there's a couple of things, right? I also worked with the Shutdownburgs Coalition, which are organizers and activists, and they continue to do this work. And there's very direct messaging that they have to do, right? In terms of lobbying, in terms of advocating for the change that needs to happen. And so for me, I really heavily relied on what the mothers wanted to say, how they wanted to say it, what did they feel was important. We also had moments, just as Shameka was just sharing, like the emotions, and be like, okay, let's take a break, have a drink of water. I was like practicing some yoga, breathing, and let me know if you want to get back to this, because we don't have to, right? And so one thing was that I had visited the mothers in the prison for 7 months. I couldn't bring a camera in. I couldn't bring, I was only able to bring like paper and pen. So a lot of like the stories or ideas and conversations, and really trust. So the Shutdownburgs Coalition became a bridge. But eventually when I went to go meet with the mothers, they were the ones that were going to decide yes or no if they were going to be a part of this, right? So there was a whole process of conversation. And so even to the point where we weren't sure if most of them were going to be released or deported. So we were in contact. And so I then was able to meet with the mothers after they had been released, and not all of them stayed in Pennsylvania. So they were in these different states that I would travel and then be with them for about a week or 2 weeks. And then begin to, had like a whole plan, but would review this plan with them to see, okay, does this work? Does this not work? Before I even go into really super deep editing of the stories, each one of the mothers saw their stories. They were really mostly concerned about, not all of them revealed their identities because they were still vulnerable. I can happily say that the mothers that remain in the U.S. also already received their asylum. They won their asylum cases, and so did their children. And so the fear of showing their face was just something that was really real in the film. So I would have to find creative ways to still represent them. And just be mindful of how they're being represented. A lot of conversation that I had directly with the mothers, and how I got to several mothers was based on that network. So even though the Shutdownburgs Coalition and their organizers created that connection and that bridge, the mothers were the ones that connected me with the other mothers. And so I value that so much, right? And so by understanding that for some of these mothers, it was the first time of sharing their story, how do I really, keeping in mind how I'm holding, right? Not just the stories with care, but the trust that they have in me, right? And that they feel that they're being well represented, and that how they want to tell their story is really how it's being shown, in the film.
And thank you for that. And I mean, I appreciate on every level for all three of y'all. It seems like there's a level of invitation into the media making process and into the filmmaking process for folks who wouldn't necessarily either be able to tell their stories or have their stories told. And I find that awesome and beautiful, and we should keep that up. To wrap this up and to close out what's been a really amazing and really powerful panel from y'all, thank you very much. Can you all just really quickly tell me about what you're working on next?
I can share. So Familias Separadas, which is Familias Separadas project, is where the documentary falls under. So the documentary was created under phase 2. Phase 1 started in Philly. Phase 2 was Pennsylvania. I just did a number of public art unveilings in June for phase 3 of Familias Separadas. So there are public artworks that are currently up, and due to COVID, we had to be creative, and we utilized the virtual sessions to give training to the actual community members to share their stories. So if you go to familiaseparadas.com, you can hear all of the stories edited and also filmed by the very own community members. And these are all highlighted through the public art installations. And so that's for Familias Separadas. And here in Philly, I've been working on my Our Market project, which is the 9th Street Market, where my mother worked for 25 years. And I am investing in creative strategies, one of them being widening the narrative and representing the diversity of immigrant vendors and workers.
So I'm working on a ton of stuff, but I'll make this very brief. I'm working with the Straight Ahead organization. They work towards changing the laws around individuals who are serving life without the possibility of parole, so death by incarceration. So I'm doing some video stuff for them to help get the word out about this issue, and hopefully try to change some laws in the future. And last but not least, I have a project coming up titled Sunkissed. It's going to be a journalism project where we will highlight women, all Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, from everything from the differently abled, I just learned that, the differently abled, to trans women, everyone. They get to share their stories or share stories, not technically their stories. They can write whatever they want, but it's all going to be on an online platform for people to read. And the goal is to help diminish some of the stereotypes around women, period, and also to spotlight like the positive things that we experience, and not so many of the negative things, but more so, things that are good that we're doing in our communities. And
so I recently produced a music video for this artist called Snail Mail that's out now. People can see. It was directed by Josh Cole, and the song's called Valentine, so you can look that up. Some new things in the works with the other creators of Philly DA, Nicole Salazar and Yoni Brook, and another project with the creator of this Netflix series I worked on called Warren Stories, Emily Spivak. We're working on a new thing together. There's a couple other things brewing that are in like early stages. But I am also, I can say I'm producing a project with the artist Jason Musson that's going to be in conjunction with the Fabric Workshop that will exist in the world sometime, I think it's summer of next year. So that's kind of everything in the works, and I wish I could be more direct about it. But then I'll get people mad at me. Yeah.
Ted, Shameka, Michelle, thank you all so very much. Thanks to Philly Cam, and thanks to Philadelphia Stories, and thanks to you watching at home, hopefully from the comfort of your nice pajamas. Cheers, y'all.